In today's episode, we're traveling to New South Wales, Australia, focusing on a suburb north of Sydney. Our central figure is Morgan Huxley, who was born on June 5, 1982, and was the oldest of 3 children. He had a younger sister named Tiffany and a brother named Oliver. Throughout his enjoyable childhood, Morgan's outgoing and friendly personality allowed him to connect with everyone around him with ease. His love for animals, particularly notable, led him to adopt a lion symbolically from Africa when he was young. This touching gesture demonstrated his compassion and courage. However, his greatest love was for the sea and boats, a passion that guided his life and led him to study naval engineering at university. Upon completing his studies, Morgan launched his career as a marine engineer, founding his own company, Huxley Marine. This company, specializing in building docks and boat sheds, enabled Morgan to establish a reputable name in the industry through his diligent work. He was widely recognized as a hard-working and skilled entrepreneur. Fast forward to the night of September 7, 2013. Morgan attended his good friend Chris's engagement party, which carried on into the late hours. While Chris and his fiancée opted to take a taxi home, Morgan decided to prolong the party, suggesting a visit to the Oaks Hotel, a nearby bar. His friends, however, declined, citing exhaustion, leaving Morgan to go ahead alone. The bar was a mere 150-meter stroll from his apartment. Around 1:30 a.m., with the bar preparing to close, surveillance cameras spotted Morgan leaving the hotel, notably without shoes and visibly intoxicated. Unfazed, he began his short walk home. Morgan's roommate, Jean, heard the door open around 1:30 a.m., but she dismissed it and drifted back into sleep. However, she was awoken by alarming noises around 2:30 a.m. Concerned, she went to investigate and encountered a horrifying scene. Morgan lay on the floor, surrounded by blood, with different stab wounds across his neck and shoulders. Panicked, a distressed Jean dialed the emergency services. Paramedics arrived promptly, but Morgan's condition was critical. He was alive, but grievously injured and losing a significant amount of blood. Tragically, Morgan suffered cardiac arrest while being rushed to the hospital and passed away later that night at the age of 31. In the autopsy that followed, it was discovered that Morgan had suffered 28 stab wounds, primarily around his neck, shoulders, and head. After the murder was committed, the assailant fled the scene with the knife. The police immediately launched an investigation with a primary objective of interviewing Morgan's roommate Jean, his friends who had attended the engagement party, his family, and the neighbors. They sought to determine if anyone had noticed suspicious activity that evening. The ferocity of the attack, indicated by multiple stabbings, suggested it was fueled by intense personal animosity. Resultantly, the investigation turned toward probing Morgan's past relationships. However, this inquiry path didn't result in any significant leads. No connection could be made between the women in Morgan's life and the heinous crime. Meanwhile, the media began broadcasting stories about Morgan's private life. In addition to grieving, his family found themselves combating misleading reports in the press. The police clarified that Morgan's murder was not committed by an ex-girlfriend, as some reports suggested. Moreover, they had yet to identify a suspect, leaving open the possibility of the crime being committed by a stranger. In the investigation's next phase, detectives planned to review security footage captured between the Oaks Hotel and Morgan's Watson Street apartment. This strategy enlisted a crucial breakthrough. The footage featured a man dressed in a white shirt and barefoot, with a bag slung over his shoulder, stalking Morgan as he walked home from the bar. Seemingly trying to catch up while avoiding detection, the man started jogging after Morgan. Closer inspection of the man's attire suggested clues about his profession. His pants were of the type commonly worn by chefs. Detectives then visited local cafes and restaurants to interview the staff, which led them to the Sydney Cooking School. Upon viewing the footage, the school staff identified the man as Daniel Kelsall. Daniel, a 20-year-old adoptee, had been raised by his parents, Mark and Lynn Kelsall. Born into a wealthy family and having 2 siblings, he enjoyed a comfortable life. His education included a period of homeschooling before studying hospitality and culinary arts at the Wellington Institute of Technology in New Zealand. Being away from his family made him feel homesick, which took a toll on his mental health. After returning to Sydney, he moved back with his family and landed a job at the Sydney Cooking School. As the murder investigation advanced, the police contacted Daniel and asked for his statement. On the same day, he voluntarily reported to the police station. While he denied involvement in Morgan Huxley's murder, he admitted to having seen Morgan that night. On the night of the murder, Daniel spent his evening working at the Sydney Cooking School, where a birthday party was taking place. The event concluded around 11:30 p.m., and Daniel stayed behind to help clean up before leaving. Shortly afterwards, he visited a convenience store to buy some alcohol, asserting that that's where he ran into Morgan Huxley. Morgan had stopped by the shop en route to a bar, making them complete and utter strangers without any prior connection. Noticing Morgan's missing footwear, Daniel commented that Morgan had lost his shoes earlier that evening. After exiting the store, Daniel claimed he aimlessly roamed for a period before crossing paths with Morgan once again at a set of traffic lights. According to Daniel, their second interaction was wordless, and they proceeded on their separate ways. He stated that he arrived home around the same time. When an investigator questioned whether he had ever visited Morgan's apartment, Daniel was unwavering in his denial. No, never. Despite Daniel's assertion, security footage contradicted his account, depicting him trailing and even sprinting after Morgan. Daniel rationalized his running, stating, "It was cold, so I started jogging. My mom always told me, if you're cold, just run." However, his narratives didn't align, and he struggled to recall certain details. At one point, he even asserted that he had returned to the Sydney Cooking School later that night. Due to these inconsistencies, detectives asked Daniel for a DNA sample. They already possessed a DNA profile from the evidence gathered at the crime scene, in addition to an unidentified fingerprint in Morgan's room, which was assumed to be the killer's. This fingerprint did not belong to either Morgan or his roommates. Another component was the fact that Morgan was discovered partially undressed, suggesting potential sexual assault. The police were keen to compare Daniel's DNA to the collected evidence, but he refused to comply. His refusal, while legally permitted, heightened investigators' suspicions. However, as the evidence against him was inconclusive, Daniel was released. Days later, Daniel reached out to the police, requesting another interview. He confessed to lying in his initial statement and declared his intention to give them the truth. Detectives met with him at a shopping center to hear his updated version of events. In his amended account, Daniel admitted to having a more profound interaction with Morgan at the convenience store, involving a conversation about a challenging week at work. Daniel then said he propositioned Morgan, asking, "Do you want to do something with me?" to which Morgan consented. Consequently, they went to Morgan's apartment on Watson Street, proceeding directly to the bedroom. Per Daniel's account, they were engaged in intimate activity for around 10 minutes before events took an unexpected turn. A blonde woman burst into the room and, upon seeing them together, became enraged. She allegedly struck Daniel on the head and engaged in a heated argument with Morgan, leading to a brief physical confrontation. Terrified, Daniel claimed, That was when he hastily left the apartment. He chalked up his initial lie to panic upon learning about Morgan's death. In this updated narrative, Daniel insinuated that the blonde woman may have been the true murderer. Despite Daniel offering a new storyline, the detectives remained skeptical. His account was fraught with inconsistencies, and there was a glaring lack of proof to corroborate his mention of the blonde woman. Morgan Huxley was a heterosexual man known for his relationships exclusively with women. As such, it was apparent that Daniel was attempting to mislead the detectives. Initially, police lacked the compelling evidence needed to detain Daniel after his first arrest, which resulted in his release. However, he remained the primary suspect in their investigation. The detectives obtained search warrants for both Daniel's residence and his place of employment, the Sydney Cooking School. At the cooking school, they made a pivotal discovery. One knife was missing, thought to be the murder weapon. The search at Daniel's home allowed police to collect several items of clothing for forensic analysis, along with the bag he was seen carrying the night of the crime via surveillance footage. Lab tests on the bag revealed traces of blood, confirmed to be Morgan Huxley's. However, this was not the only damning piece of evidence. Daniel's DNA matched the unidentified fingerprint found at the crime scene, as well as the DNA discovered on Morgan's body, initially signifying sexual assault. Supported by this irrefutable forensic evidence, Daniel Kelsall was rearrested and charged with the murder and sexual assault of Morgan Huxley. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Daniel showed no remorse and continued to insist on his second statement's veracity, regardless of the inconsistencies. Meanwhile, investigators continued to build their case, uncovering unsettling details about Daniel's mental health history. Just over a year before Morgan's murder, Daniel had revealed a chilling fantasy to a psychiatrist. He confessed to picturing himself stabbing someone to death on his way home from work. This frightening scenario ended up becoming Morgan's reality. These revelations devastated Daniel's family, who directed their disappointment at the psychiatrist, blaming them for not intervening earlier. It's horrifying that one might express such cries for help, only to end up in this situation. If our son had received appropriate help earlier, maybe this awful tragedy could have been avoided, they expressed. Daniel was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, depression, bipolar disorder, and was also on the autism spectrum. While these diagnoses illuminated his struggles, they offered little pardon for the horrific crimes he committed. Leading up to the trial, detectives meticulously reviewed past reports to see if Morgan Huxley was the only victim of Daniel Kelsall. Their investigation revealed that just a week after Morgan's murder, Daniel had stalked another young man. Dressed in the same chef's uniform from the night of Morgan's demise, Daniel trailed this person all the way home. This occurrence further underscored Daniel's predatory behavior and the potential danger he posed to others. Before the trial began, renowned forensic psychologist Dr. Susan Pullman was asked to assess Daniel's mental health. Her thorough evaluation concluded that while Daniel was indeed highly intelligent and suffered from several mental health disorders, he wasn't so critically mentally ill that he couldn't be held responsible for his deeds. He was found capable of empathizing with others and was declared fit to stand trial. Nearly a year later, in March 2015, the trial for Morgan Huxley's murder kicked off. Throughout the process, Daniel vehemently maintained his innocence, persistently recalling his alternate version of events. He claimed that Morgan had invited him for a consensual sexual engagement, which was cut short by a blonde woman who later quarreled with Morgan. However, despite his strong defense, the incriminating evidence against Daniel was compelling. He was convicted of murdering 31-year-old Morgan Huxley and was handed down a 40-year prison sentence. In 2017, Daniel attempted to appeal his conviction, but the appeal was rapidly dismissed. Daniel is required to serve a minimum of 30 years before he can apply for parole.
Before we conclude this video, please be aware that the video on the left may be disturbing. It is recommended for adult viewing only. On the right, you'll find a playlist of videos that have been highly appreciated by our viewers.